In order to help Canadians with their bills and the high cost of living, Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland is recommending that we cancel our Disney Plus subscription like she did with her family to save money. To talk about this in more detail is political reporter and Sun columnist Brian Lilley, who joins us from Toronto. Brian, many would view that piece of advice as kind of a slap in the face to Canadians. How about maybe not increasing the carbon tax or maybe not taking as much off of our paychecks?
They're going to be increasing as of January 1st, your CPP and EI premiums. Those are two payroll taxes. And yes, they are payroll taxes. Your employer has to pay them as well, and they don't get the benefit of EI or a pension at the end of it. They're going to be increasing on April 1st the carbon tax. They're going to be increasing the annual tax on beer and wine and other spirits. They're bringing in new taxes in this fall economic statement that came out last week. But worse than that, Hal, Chrystia Freeland made that out of touch comment about Disney Plus while saying that, I just like all the mothers out there have to look after their family budget. I'm doing that with Canadians. And that's why she said she's canceled Disney Plus. Find little bits of savings. Where are the savings in the federal spending? The fall economic statement increased spending from last April's budget by $20 billion for the current fiscal year. $20 billion. Between April and November. What are we spending the money on? This is not COVID relief programs. Those have all been wound down. Overall, spending is up more than a third since the pre-pandemic days. And as I said, we're not doing the COVID spending anymore. We've got deficits going out of control, and that means higher debt. Right now, that means higher interest rates. Our debt payments, the servicing the debt, this is just paying the interest, not even paying a penny of the debt down. It was supposed to be 26.9 billion this year. That's what they said in the April budget. Now they say it'll be 34.7. Next year, it'll be 43 billion. Wow. We're spending more on servicing the debt than we are on our military, the Canada Child Benefit, than we are on EI. And we're spending almost as much as we spend on the health transfer from the federal government to the provinces. Don't tell me about canceling Disney Plus when you're spending on everything else is going through the roof. Chrystia Freeland is out of touch on this one. She did admit later that she's very privileged, but she didn't add that she's also out of touch.
Besides, Disney Plus has all of the Marvel movies. We can't cancel that, Brian.
Exactly.
Brian, the Emergencies Act inquiry continues in our nation's capital. Now, before we get to the latest evidence, one high-profile person will not be attending, and that's Ontario Premier Doug Ford. He won his court challenge to quash the summons. Brian, wasn't the Premier's testimony relevant for this inquiry?
You could argue about that. I would say it would be interesting to the inquiry, but I don't think it's relevant to the central question, which is why did the federal government invoke the Emergencies Act? That's the fundamental question that this inquiry has to answer. Doug Ford's position is this was a policing matter, and it's a federal inquiry called into the invocation of a federal law. Now, can you imagine the outcry if Danielle Smith or Scott Moe or Doug Ford decided they were going to call an inquiry into the handling of COVID-19, and then as part of that decided to issue a summons for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau so that he could be interrogated as to the government's decision not to put in restrictions or screening at airports, the government's handling of the vaccine. They would not only refuse to comply with it, they would be scoffed at. Oh, you can't have one level of government calling the other. So Ford went to court. He said that it was parliamentary privilege, and he won on that. The Ontario legislature is sitting right now. It's in session. It's not sitting this week, but Ford is pretty darn busy with the school strike and everything else that we might talk about later on. So yeah, the judge found whether you believe Ford should appear or not, the judge made the right decision based on law.
Now, we've heard from top police officials who did not think that the Emergencies Act was needed. But this week we heard from another witness who said, you know what, it was absolutely necessary. So who do we believe? Who was right?
Well, so far, I'm going to go with the top police and intelligence officials who were saying, no, don't do this. Windsor Mayor Drew Dilkins looking at it from a very personal, practical, and political lens. His city is the gateway to Canada in terms of trade. It's the busiest border crossing in North America in terms of two-way trade. And the bridge was shut down for a week. Never should have happened. Never should have gone on as long as it did. but it was cleared before the Emergencies Act was invoked. Now, Ontario invoked its own Emergencies Act or version of it. I forget the official name. It's far less draconian, far less sweeping powers. It doesn't go nearly as far as the federal government. It just gave police a few more powers to clear the bridge, which they did a full day and a half, 2 days before Justin Trudeau invoked the Emergencies Act. So I understand where Mayor Dilkins is coming from. He was looking at it saying all these factories are going to shut down. And when you think of something like the auto industry, where parts will go back and forth across the border 7 times before a car is complete, and it's all just in time delivery, you were looking at thousands upon thousands of people being laid off by that bridge being shut down if it continued. So I get it from an economic angle. I don't think he's right on the need to invoke the Emergencies Act, though.
Brian, one document that came up in testimony this week showed that CSIS warned the Trudeau Liberals that invoking the Emergencies Act could anger a number of Canadians further and potentially radicalize some. Why then did the feds move forward with invoking the act?
Well, look, they didn't listen to CSIS and they didn't listen to the RCMP. RCMP Commissioner Brenda Lucki um, told them that we haven't used all the tools we need. And now we find, and they still went ahead. Now we find out that CSIS told them this will radicalize people, and they still went ahead. The concern from CSIS wasn't that there would be violence right away, but that by invoking the act, people who are angry at government and decided that this protest was a good way of expressing that might turn around and then say, well, I have no other option now. I've got to turn to violence because if I protest, they just shut me down. That was part of the thinking from CSIS. They warned the government about this both before and after the Emergencies Act was invoked. That warning seems to have been ignored. It'll be really interesting to find out more when David Viano, the head of CSIS, testifies, and I think that's going to happen next week.
Brian, school strikes don't usually make national news headlines, but this past week that changed as Ontario used the notwithstanding clause to try and end the strike, and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau launched attacks on Ontario Premier Doug Ford for suspending charter rights. Now, wait a minute. Didn't our Prime Minister do something similar when he invoked the Emergencies Act during the Freedom Convoy?
I would argue that yes, he did. The Liberals keep saying that charter rights weren't suspended by invoking the Emergencies Act. That was the entire point. They suspended rights for peaceful assembly. They suspended rights on travel. They suspended all kinds of rights, including being able to say to someone, you must provide me a service, whether you want to or not. The whole thing around tow truck operators. So the Emergencies Act definitely suspended charter rights. But beyond that, Trudeau also suspended charter rights with his mandate that you needed to be vaccinated to get on a plane or a train. That is a violation of Section 6 charter rights. Your mobility rights are enshrined in the charter. You should be free and able to move around this country. And he stopped that. He made it very difficult for some people to go across the country. Why? Wasn't based on science. It was based on politics and fear. That was headed towards a court challenge, and the government dropped the requirement for the mandates just before it was going to court, and then went before the judge and said, well, this is all moot now. We don't need to have this. Please throw the case out. The judge ended up saying, yes, there's no mandate in place now, so there's no need to test it. I wish they had said, no, we need to go further and see if it was if the court would find it was a charter rights violation. We didn't get there. But also beyond that, Trudeau comes from Quebec. They've got Bill 96, which strips away language rights for the English-speaking minority. There are historically English towns in Quebec where the municipality wants to provide your tax bill, your water bill, what have you, in English. They always have. There's no issue locally, but the province has gone in and said, you can't do that anymore. Trudeau has been mute on that. He's expressed a concern now and again, but he didn't launch a week-long campaign. Same with Bill 21, which says if you wear a cross, a Star of David, a yarmulke, a hijab to work and you're a public servant, that you're going to be removed from your job. And one teacher was removed from the classroom. He never went on a week-long campaign. So Trudeau is an absolute hypocrite on this, and I hope people see it for what it is. Quebec can invoke the notwithstanding clause all the time on far greater matters of importance, and Trudeau's silence, but he's angry at Doug Ford. It makes no sense.
You know, Brian, so many families we chatted with were crushed with the fact that they couldn't go see other family members who were dying in other parts of Canada. They couldn't fly, they couldn't take the train, like you said. So, yeah, it devastated a number of families here across the country. Now, speaking of health, provincial health ministers are meeting with their federal counterpart in British Columbia. All the provinces are actually asking for is an increase in health funding. Do you think they'll receive it?
Um, Partly, but not what they want and not for the reason that they want. They're going to get an automatic increase because of the formula the way it is now. When there's inflation, it's tied to inflation. And so because inflation's so high this year, they're going to get a one-time bump up. But when inflation goes back down, that disappears. So this is not the permanent steady funding that premiers have been asking for. And, it was interesting to see Adrian Dix, the BC health minister, out at the conference saying the prime minister's not a potted plant. He's got to show up and actually talk to the provinces, which he's refused to do. He talked a big game coming into office in 2015. He's never followed through on it in terms of respecting provinces the way he promised he would. He didn't overturn Harper's funding formula that he called a healthcare cut. He's kept it in place, and he has refused to negotiate any further increases. So they're going to get a one-time bump due to inflation, but they're not going to get what they say they need. They don't want the federal government to go back up to 50%, by the way, but they are asking for 30, 35% funding instead of the 21, 22% that they provide now. What the federal government wants to do is call the shots and not pay the bill. And that's unacceptable to the provinces.
Brian, the United Nations Climate Change Conference is getting underway fairly soon. It runs November 6th through the 18th. Many dignitaries will be flying with their jumbo jets into Egypt, polluting the atmosphere, including Edmonton Mayor Sohi. And Brian, the event will be held at a luxury beach resort, the best your tax dollars can buy.
I've been trying to find out, will there be a $6,000 a night room, Hal? Don't know yet. Time will tell. We're going to have to wait for the access to information requests to come back on this one. I have asked Environment and Climate Change Minister Stephen Guilbeault, or through his office, I've asked, where are you staying? They won't say. How many people are you taking? They won't say. But we know Canada, historically under the Trudeau government, has had one of the largest delegations. We're not the largest country by population. We're not close. We're not the largest country by carbon emissions. Not close. But last year it was just shy of 300 people in Glasgow. In Paris, their first year, it was 300 people. In Spain, which was a smaller conference, I think we were still second. We're regularly triple the UK's delegation count and double the Americans. How on earth does that make sense? It doesn't. But they are going to be staying at the Sharm el Sheikh. Look it up if you haven't seen it. I'll have a video posted out soon showing some of the beautiful spots. You can still get rooms, but they're going to be pretty pricey. So I'm guessing $2,500 a night for the hotel rooms at some of these beach resorts. And by the way, it's being held at the Lamborghini Convention Center.
That sounds very affordable. Lamborghini, absolutely. Not Ferrari, but Lamborghini.
Look, it's a car maker.
Yeah, that's right. Brian, what's the latest with Canada's support for Ukraine right now? I mean, we've given a lot of money when it comes to humanitarian aid, some military supplies, and some people are saying, Canada's being stretched too thin and we don't have any more to give. What are you hearing?
Well, I know that there's a push on to try and get some of the money that Canada seized from Russia and just hand those Russian funds over to the Ukraine. This gentleman named Bill Browder, who's been at the forefront of this fight internationally, who's been an enemy of Putin for years. He's the guy behind the Magnitsky Act that allows you to freeze funds that Canada passed, the US, the UK, and Australia and other countries. He was meeting recently with Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland, and he's been pushing on this. Now, I've been trying to find out exactly how much Russian cash we seized. The Russians had left their Canadian dollar foreign exchange funds at the Bank of Canada. So those funds were seized. Other countries have done the same. Around the world, there's more than 300 billion of Russian funds that have been seized by different Western governments that could be handed over to Ukraine. So, for all the people worried that we're spending too much to fund the war in Ukraine, there's an easier solution. Give them Vladimir Putin's money. He doesn't deserve it. He is a dictator who is profiting off of his own invasion of another country, give Zelensky Putin's money, and things will turn around very quickly.
Sounds like a solid solution. Toronto Sun columnist and political reporter Brian Lilley, thanks again for your time today.
Thank you.